Hello, Khalil. Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Let me promote you.
No, can
no,
you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Let me put the video on. Amazing.
Hey,
Hi.
Colombe, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good, good. It's very good.
I'm really happy to be having this conversation. I'm just setting up the live on the different social media.
Yes.
And I'm just checking it's working, and I'll be with you in less than a second.
Okay. Okay, great.
Perfect. We're live on Facebook, and I can already see a lot of people watching.
Andrea.
Hi, Khalil. How's it going?
How are you?
Good, good. And you?
Very good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Are you in Florida right now?
Yes, I am.
Good.
Yeah, capital of confusion. I'm in the capital of confusion.
That's I hope you have a better weather though than we have in London.
And listen, the weather here is absolutely stunning. It more than offsets everything else that's going on in the country.
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
And you can find isolated beaches to be able to actually be outside.
That's very nice.
It's good.
Very cool.
Yeah. So what is it? The weather is really dreary there.
I mean, we are in a national lockdown, so like there is not much to do in general. And now like November weather in the UK is also very, very dire. So it's not a fun time.
Yes. But it'll soon be turning. It'll soon turn.
Exactly.
And listen, they're saying a vaccine is on the way.
That's very
great
true.
news.
Yes.
Very good news.
I'm excited. I think, people are not going to tolerate the lockdown much longer anyway. I mean, in many ways, there's already kind of mass rebellion. So I think that smaller group of people who will be more visible and vocal about their opposition will eventually have disproportionate impact. So they're going to have to do something pretty radical,
Yeah.
No, I agree. The only worry I have, and by the way, everyone, we will start the event in 5 minutes, so it's just a bit of chit chat ahead of it. But the only worry I have is that a few countries will hold most doses of vaccines, which means that the rest of the world will be left with nothing. And it has happened for every pandemic in the last decades.
Sure.
Which is also very worrying because it means that entire health system could collapse because of a lack of, not only vaccines, but PPE and so on.
Yes, that's what we're faced with.
I know, but we are both lucky in the sense that you're in the US and I'm in the UK, and those are some of the countries that will most likely get the vaccine first.
Yes.
Hopefully as well.
Yeah, and but because even within kind of the metro centers, there's great contradictions, and people at the bottom, people who have existed in the cracks and crevices of our systems, really do function like function within third world economies within first worlds. So, you have situations where even though we're talking about a vaccine being available in the UK and the US, there are significant sections and segments of our society that just still do not have access, will not have access, just because of how culturally isolated and distant they are from these very basic services. So it just shows you how deep these contradictions are.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
Just to mention, I see that people are starting to log in, especially on Facebook. We normally have the bulk of our followers on Facebook on these events, and so they're starting to comment and so on. So just for our Facebook friends, we are gonna start in just a couple of minutes. We just wait for more people to find the link and be ready to start, and then we're gonna basically introduce Khalil and start with the event.
And let me just say, as always, for anyone who's already watching, if you already have questions, don't hesitate to comment on Facebook or on the Zoom chat. We'll be monitoring it throughout. We really want to hear from you as well on this very, very important conversation. It's a conversation, as we said. It's not a monologue. I already see comments on Facebook from people from Hong Kong following with great interest. So we're beginning to have a lot of people.
A good global event. The positive things of the pandemic is that it's easier to organize these kind of digital events. People like them more. Yeah.
Well, and I think that, again, these are things that were coming, but the pace of it has been expedited in many respects. Yeah. So this level of communication is increasingly becoming part of our daily routines. I mean, who needs to go drive 3 hours a day to go to a job to be productive for 2 hours? Yeah, if we're just really honest with ourselves and stop feeling that it's necessary to buy into the charade about how our lives should be ordered, that level of honesty, I think, at least opens the door for us to begin to think differently about how we even do something as fundamental as organize our daily lives.
Yeah, that's true. That's totally true.
You know?
So I think that we are ready to start. Let's jump into the event. Just for those that are connecting now on Facebook, we are hosting this chat on Zoom and other platform, but Zoom is just for our close members and those there that we send the email to, and obviously we have all our followers on Facebook connecting, and later we're going to post the same chat on YouTube and maybe even Instagram to ensure maximum diffusion. I'm going to have the pleasure to introduce just now the organization that is hosting this chat, and then Colombe will jump in introducing the chat, and obviously Khalil will take it from there. So let's jump into it. Thank you so much for all those that are connecting from every corner of the world. I see people from Hong Kong, Venezuela, European, American, so very global audience today. Just a few words about why we're having this event about truth and reconciliation. As you know, probably if you're following this live, now is a global movement. We are now present in more than 100 countries. We have 10,000 people involved in our activities. And we're basically working to unite people behind common causes from every corner of this planet. And obviously a huge topic is truth and reconciliation, because we have to overcome historical rifts and many scars that our country's cultures bring along because of history. And so when we met Khalil back at the Athens Democracy Forum, an event we attended a month ago, both Colombe and I as the co-founders of NOW, we had the chance to start this conversation. And today is the moment where we're gonna deep dive in what truth and reconciliation means for our movement and for the world. So having said that, big pleasure to meet all the new attendees that I don't know. I'm Andrea Venzon, one of the co-founder, and I'm gonna pass the mic to Colombe, Cahen-Salvador.
Hi everyone, so thank you for joining. Thanks Khalil for joining us. I'm really, really, really excited for this conversation. It's been a long time coming. And I'll introduce you quite quickly because I can't do your career justice, I think, in just 2 minutes, and people are here may need to listen to you. But so for those of you that are already present, you saw Khalil's career and journey on the event and on the Facebook page, but he has a remarkable story. He spent more than 20 years of his life in prison and changed, I think, from at least the conversation I've had with him, drastically throughout. He came out of it with different spirits and way of looking at life. And when he got out, he founded the Reflecting Freedom Network, which is a not-for-profit organization that accredits people and communities incarcerated with job skills and education. And we all know that this is drastically important today. But he didn't just work in the US. He has a passion for restorative justice, and he also worked in South Africa. And this year, the Reflecting Freedom Network started a documentary series, which is called Truth and Reconciliation Conversations. So it's very much along the lines of the conversation we're having today in the first place. And it shares stories about racism and the global struggle to overcome it. From what I saw, I already watched the documentary, so I get to watch it a second time today. But it seeks to build on Mandela's vision of reconciliation by celebrating the stories of individuals who are taking action to help change their communities and the world. And so it's pretty clear why we're having this conversation. Andrea already mentioned it, but when we met with Khalil, we realized that, we need to be having those conversations at a global level. I think they're starting to appear more and more in certain countries, but at now we seek to unite people across borders to create the world we want for tomorrow. But how can we do so before having honest, truthful conversations that can lead to reconciliations, considering the world's complicated history of colonialism, racism, and so on. And so Khalil has kindly accepted to join this long event with us to first discuss how he came to do this work, what he thinks are the biggest barriers that need to be overcome to do it, before watching together the documentary and then reconvening and discussing it. So I spoke enough. That's all on my side. But Khalil, thank you for joining us. And, as I said, it's been a long time coming. I wanted the first question to be a bit more of an explanation for the audience.
Yes.
What do you understand by truth and reconciliation? What does it mean to you?
Well, basically, what I have experienced around the issue of race is great angst, great conflict, great stress, and in many instances, guilt when it comes to even broaching the topic of race. And I think back to my childhood when I would go to school and we would have history. In America, the history of Black people almost always started in slavery. Anytime there was a reference to the telling of our stories in our class, the starting point for me as a black child was always a place of shame. I mean, I never felt good sitting in my classroom as a little boy, hearing that the story about the people who looked like me and who historically are me is a story of degradation, is a story of a people who seemed powerless. So from a very early age, I was deeply challenged by the story that I was given about who I am. And you have to understand that the context for this story was given to me in a place where I was told this should be the place where I seek my highest goals, school. I mean, in my household, education was prioritized above virtually everything. So to be given a message that school is this important, and to get to school, to arrive at school and have the kind of messages that I received, and then to have experiences as a child, as a young person, where these views were acted out in terms of how my schoolmates and I interacted with each other. Without being even fully conscious of the implications of what we were learning in our class and how we behaved and treated each other on the playground, I began to be aware that there was in fact differences at a very early age. So the organizing of truth and reconciliation comes from a very deep place for me in my own journey. My putting together an initiative around truth and reconciliation is essentially focused on the idea, the fundamental belief that we have the capacity to ignite citizen engagement, to face racism and heal together. So that is our fundamental goal. That's what we're seeking to achieve. And my core belief is that this kind of the essence of life is relationships. And if you want to understand relationship and how to be in healthy relationship, it starts with communication. So truth and reconciliation comes both from a deep place in my own journey, culturally, historically, personally, and as a way for me to meet the challenge of this moment with a tool that allows us to organize around our shared power as opposed to our differences and divisions.
Thank you, Khalil, for this very thorough presentation of like the topic at hand and why you started this very important work. Just want to mention that you seem to have a lot of fans on social media because our Facebook page and Instagram page have been bombed already by comments and small questions. But I think the one sum up very well, let's say the most comments that we're receiving is you have your unique experience and perspective having worked on this topic in South Africa and in the US. And could you elaborate a bit on the similarities and differences you saw in the two countries, and what can we learn from this experience?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that there are many very significant historical similarities with respect to the struggle for human rights in South Africa and America. And I often say, I often call South Africa the America of Africa, because it has in many ways adopted American culture, unlike other parts of Africa. And for good and ill, I say that. But just starting at a very basic kind of historic reference point that most people are familiar with, is an association of apartheid with South Africa. What I would say is that America had apartheid, and we called it segregation. Now, there are a number of people who make the case that, well, it was de facto segregation and apartheid. I would say it was a jury. It wasn't just based on some general incoherent idea or philosophy about how we oppress people, particularly Africans in America. It was supported by law. And those laws, to a great extent, continue in American society today, which is part of this whole kind of the discussion about how do we begin to intelligently talk about our history. Now, what happened in South Africa that I think is quite unique and historically significant is that at least South Africa had the courage to face the history, the brutal history of apartheid. However embryonic, however incomplete its effort, society, the South African society decided that it was important for them to make the effort to begin to unpack a history that left the entire society deeply wounded and divided. In America, we have yet to have that conversation. We have yet to confront the demon of our history. Consequently, these events, such as the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and on and on and on, become flashpoints for a conversation that we're not having. And I get it. I understand that this conversation is really painful. And in some ways, people think that it's impossible to have a conversation such as the one that we need and such as was started in South Africa, because we have irreconcilable experiences. When one begins to talk about racism, there is this whole kind of backdrop of irreconcilable experiences that we bring to the table that there's oftentimes no immediate words for. So in our work, in my work, looking at the parallels between, for example, South Africa and America, I immediately recognize the need for this conversation in both spaces and the fact that it's happening. And yet I also see the frailty of it. I also see that conversation is not enough. So I don't talk about truth and reconciliation and the work that has been done historically in South Africa and the work that we're doing in America. I don't say that in any slight or trivial sense. I say that it's something that I have focused my attention on doing with great diligence and deep commitment, because I know that I have voice in that space. And so, and I like to just say kind of another footnote in terms of similarities and of experiences between South Africa and America. In America, having served 20 years in prison, there is a kind of stigma that is almost universal. And yet, mass incarceration is what I call one of America's existential crises. It's pervasive. Now, when one comes out of prison in America, it quite often you hear people hiding their past. An interesting thing for me was when I got to South Africa, having served 20 years in prison, actually my credentials ranked with the ruling class, with the ruling party. In fact, many people in the ruling party who were in government, if they hadn't been in incarceration, one might look at them with suspicion. So I went from being in a situation in America where this was seen as something just such a horrible thing and a shame to my family and all of that, to being in South Africa where the views about incarceration are not as rigid and negative, because there are historical factors that people understand in real time and granularly that have contributed to this narrative about prison. So, so the similarities are deep and they're also wide.
That makes a lot of sense. We got a question from someone on Facebook asking for us to go back to the basics.
Yes.
So we know that there's a problem in America of mass incarceration, that it touches disproportionately African Americans. We know that this is something that is not just the case in the US, although it is the focus of the discussion on global racism, but we know that it's something that is happening across the world. When we talk about truth and reconciliation, what is a truth and reconciliation conversation for you? And I'm asking this because I think for the rest of the conversation and for people entering this conversation and waiting to see the documentary, they might want to understand practically what you mean by having a conversation that is truthful and with the aim of reconciliation. How does this play out? And it's okay if you want to give us different contexts and so on, but just so that people understand exactly what we're talking about here.
Right. Thanks so much, Colombe. One of the core focus of the truth and reconciliation process is to acknowledge that each of us have voice and power, and that we can use it intentionally. We can use it for our own good. So when we're looking at something as big as racism, oftentimes people feel overwhelmed. We feel that, you know, we don't even know where to start when it comes to dealing with an issue like watching the murder of George Floyd. And then when you talk to people who have viewed it in horror, and I'm talking about progressives, liberal people who you would consider woke or enlightened. And I have asked whites around the world in my conversations, do you have any Black friends who, after the murder of George Floyd, you were talking with them and you were shocked by what they told you about how they have experienced racism? And invariably, they say yes. Yeah, and I'm talking about progressive individuals of various ethnicities, but particularly white progressives, liberals. Now, how is it that you're progressive and yet it takes George Floyd's murder for you to realize that even you, in your closest relationships with Blacks, for example, are unaware that they have been experiencing this on such a deep personal level? So when we say truth and reconciliation conversations when we talk about it as a process, we're talking about recognizing that thing that you're so surprised about, it doesn't have to remain that way. You have agency in that situation. And rather than feeling powerless, I want people to recognize that they are powerful. In fact, the existential question confronting us is, how do we make better use of the power we already have? How do we use it? There are those who would make the argument that poor people around the world, oppressed people around the world are powerless. I make the opposite case. I say that we are so powerful that there are those who must organize to convince us that we are powerless. So it's like Martin Luther King said it best: those who love peace must learn to organize as effectively as those who love war. So to do that, most people are not part of any organization. They're not part of any large group, but they do on a daily basis have conversations with their friends, even with people that they don't particularly like. So it's a tool, a common tool that's available to every person anywhere on the planet, no matter how powerless they may feel in any given moment. They have the power of their voice. They have the power of a conversation. And that conversation, I'm not saying it starts from some enlightened utopian place. No, it starts with the experiences that you're living. And we ought to be able to share our experiences as we are living them with a degree of honesty and acceptance from those who may not share it, but at least be willing to hear it. So I think that conversations are a powerful tool that common people have to transform their own lives. And let me go even further with this idea of why truth and reconciliation conversations. Number one, most of what we believe about other people comes from stories we tell ourselves, stories that we have internalized about who other people are. In fact, stories are so powerful that they inform who we see ourselves as. Now, every story is measured by the extent of change that happens within it. A great story has what the Chinese call an interesting spin, an interesting tale of change, challenge, confusion, being confounded, being confronted, being conflicted. All of those things are part of the conversation. So that's why we have in this model, in this process we use, we have a 5-step process, and we talk about that and we go into details about that, which people will be able to get on the website. But I want to go to the essence of why truth and reconciliation conversations and the potential that it has as a tool for change. If I begin to rethink and understand the power of my words, the power that I have to share my experience on my own terms, in my own way, that radically changes my sense of agency. So I put it like this: all power starts with self-perception. And self-perception is fundamentally rooted in the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. So if you don't like who you are, it's because of the story you're telling yourself about who you are. If you don't like another human being that you don't even know, that you are judging based on the color of their skin or their gender or their religion or some other trivial difference that you have no control over, then the question becomes, what kind of story is that? And where did you get it from? And why are you holding on to it so tenaciously in the face of evidence, constant evidence to the contrary? And who is it serving? These are just fundamental questions that if we begin to be self-reflective just a little bit, no matter our title, no matter our ethnicity, no matter our gender, no matter our religion, I don't care what difference someone would like to suggest, no matter your age. Yes, I'm saying that even children, particularly children, come to the world with a very pronounced, clear sense of this. And so left to their own devices, here's what happens. They act out an experience that's reflective of their environment. So this is why I say, number one, if all power starts with self-perception, the second point is all behavior is learned. Therefore, it can be unlearned. So racism is behavior. When we talk about measuring it, we have to look at how people treat each other. We have to look at disparities. Look, in France, there's not even a definition for race. There's this whole policy around ignoring the social reality of race. That's almost like Trump saying the only reason that we have so many cases of COVID-19 is because we're testing. What an absurdity.
Yeah. Actually,
this is an absurdity.
Let me interject on that, because actually the question that I wanted to ask, it's very related to this one. Basically, you brought in the institutional aspect. You said, like,
yes,
in France. So my question would be, this kind of conversation, where should they take place? So obviously at the private level, in any organization, but it is something that we need to push for also in the legal system, the political system, in the institution. And I'm going to attach another question that we received on Instagram. There's a member now asking, when conversations are great, but what's next in case a conversation is not effective? What should I do?
Yes. Okay. So this is a very important point for us to focus on as we seek to have clarity in this conversation. When we look around the world and we think about the global grand challenges that are facing us, and we ask ourselves, what can we do to change it? There are many ways, there are many paths to effect change. And as a person who's committed to this work, each of us must be reflective about what we believe our role to be. Now, for me, the simplest kind of solution to moving beyond conversation is to move into the space of joining organizations doing the work that embody the conversations you're having. And if there is no organization, then it's your responsibility to create that organization. So when I'm asked, what do we do beyond conversation? The direct, simple answer is organize. We organize around the interest that we have clarified and agreed upon in our conversations. So if you and I begin to have a conversation about racism and we say, yes, this is an evil that we must address, we must face this and do something about it together, then we must, after we have that conversation, then we look at each other and say, yeah, okay, then what are we going to do? That's a part of the conversation as well. And so you can never have effective organization without having effective communication. Now, in our days of organizing, we called that, in order to get unity of action, you have to get unity of thought. Unity of thought does not mean that everybody thinks the same, but it does mean that we come to an agreement about what challenges we're going to face and how we will prioritize our efforts and our resources in a way that's going to be effective. So unity of thought is essential for unity of action. And this ideal of conversation sits in the gap. It is the means by which we do this work.
Thank you, Khalil, for answering this. I'm going to jump on a question in the chat from Lara, who's saying that she's very happy to hear and learn more about this topic. And she has a question, which is very much linked to what Andrea discussed. Do you think we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission at the global level, like in South Africa? And I think this is a particularly interesting question because we had, the two of us, that discussion already.
Yes.
But how to, not necessarily formalize, but how to have a process across the world to have those difficult conversations, cross-country, beyond borders, beyond the local level, to be able to move forward as one, to be able to truly work together. We need to acknowledge the historical crimes that have been committed, the current political discourse that is problematic, and how do we do it at the global level? Do we learn from history? Do we do something new?
Well, first of all, I think that as you said, this is the very conversation that we had in Athens framed this issue, which is why I was so excited then and remain excited in terms of joining with now. Because when we talk about the impact of organization, now is the kind of organization that I'm referring to, which could provide a global platform for us transforming our concern into direct action. So when we drill down and ask ourselves more granular questions about how this work can be done, absolutely it has to happen globally. But let me just say this, it's already happening globally. Let's not fool ourselves. The work of social justice, the work of human rights, the work of the dignity of our humanity that calls us to speak that and to live it is always being done by people. It may not be organized in ways that has social impact, such as other movements, but you cannot be human and not have a commitment to, or at least make the effort to share your humanity in a dignified way. So it's already happening. People are having conversations. Children are challenging their parents all over the world about why things are the way they are in the society that they live in. Little girls are saying, but mommy, why? Why did you let him do it? And then you told me no. Why? Don't think that those questions are unique to us who are considered awake and all of that. No, they're happening in the most remote corners of the world. So given that it's already happening everywhere in the world, the conversations are happening everywhere in the world. The easiest way for us to tap into what already exists is to not reinvent the wheel. Say to people, yeah, those conversations that you're already having, we have a platform that gives coherence, that allows those conversations to begin to be organized in the context of a global narrative. That global narrative then has the power to begin to ignite a different perspective about what we are able to do to confront racism, to face racism and heal together. So I'm very encouraged. And particularly when I think about just the amount of progress that you have made with now in the short period of time that you have been organizing this phase of your work, not saying anything about all the work that both of you have been doing prior to that. But you have created another level of organization, another level of impact. And so when we understand that, we know that organization is the tool that allows us to be disproportionately impactful. Organization is that tool.
That's very true. I'm also interested in understanding, the cross-border aspect. You mentioned, for example, France, which is my home country, and it's not only no definition of race, it has no definition of minority. Because post Second World War, I hope that it came from a good sentiment of, if we start categorizing people, the same thing might happen. Yes. However, many, many years later, we talk about the systematic stop and searches of Black young men in the US. I think a Black young man is 7 times more likely to be arrested than a white one in the US. In France, the estimates are at 21 times more likely. But because we don't recognize race, we don't have a problem. So we have a comprehensive, systematic, political and social problem around, first of all, the acknowledgement of race and then racism, and then how to solve it in France. Keeping with France, it also has a very complicated history of colonialism that created a lot of the racism and so on that is here. So beyond the conversations that are happening everywhere across the world, my thinking is that we need to be having this conversation cross-border and also at the political level. So beyond, the three of us and all of the people following online and on Zoom right now having this conversation, those conversations need to happen between the leaders of different countries that have responsibilities in a forum that is organized. And, we talked about this. For me now, I hope we'll be organizing more and more and more of those conversations, but it needs to go much beyond us. It needs to be done by politicians, bringing in young people, bringing in older generations and so on to have those conversations to be able to move forward. Because if we don't acknowledge the mistakes of the past and of the present, how can we move forward towards a better future? So how do you suggest we go about this?
Well, see, this is, okay, well, you've said a lot. One of the things that I want to just hit on briefly, Europe, in America, we talk about the civil rights movement. And so it's a concrete kind of point in history that people can look at that happened within America. Europe had a civil rights movement as well. People don't think about it, but it happened in the colonies. So because it happened in the colonies, people in Europe, let's just look at France and Germany, both countries of which don't categorize race. And I understand the wretched history of Nazism. I understand the Vichy government's compromise. I'm really clear about it, and how this reticence to address this idea of racial categorization comes out of this really dark period in European history. But as much as that's said, and as much as it's true, think about a person of Senegalese descent, living in Paris, raised in Paris, who actually is convinced they're not Black. I mean, just imagine psychologically, you who are French, look at them, and first of all, they have been there 3 generations, let's say, in France, and they're still being asked, where are you from?
Yeah.
So these kinds of contradictions are not distant contradictions. They're contradictions we are living in real time. And a Truth and Reconciliation Conversations Commission structure, global structure, it sets the stage for people to heal from that. Because let us not be blind to the fact that there are a lot of people wounded by the stain of racism, the scourge of racism, systematic denigration of people based on color. And so those conversations by themselves have power, by themselves. Now, if we are committed to the process of creating a global forum for these conversations to be aired so that we can begin to now change the narrative, well, that's exactly what our goal is with Reflecting Freedom Network, and why we started with Truth and Reconciliations, because we are doing documentaries. We understand the use and the power of popular culture to impact people around the world. So we are clear that in as much as we're saying we need to organize, we also must understand how to use popular culture more effectively to communicate the kinds of messages that we say are important around change, social transformation, and in some cases, revolution. So when we talk concretely, which we'll also be able to do after people look at the documentary, they'll see that this initiative that we've launched here in America is by design meant to be replicated to scale around the world. And imagine if those of us around the world who are participating in this process take our collective documentaries and share them with Now. And annually, this is why we premiered it on Nelson Mandela International Day in this year. We premiered the documentary on Nelson Mandela International Day to bring global attention to the issue. Imagine that we now in our organization and other organizations globally began to put together the conversations happening in their spaces. And then we begin the process of sharing our stories globally. We don't need permission to do that.
Yeah.
We don't need anyone's okay or go ahead. And this is the power that we have in our hands. And this is why I say, let's not start from what we don't have. Let's start from the power in our hands.
Makes a lot of sense. Khalil, I want to give you a live feedback from our social media. There is a person from Hong Kong that just said that he's very moved to tears from your message. So like, just to tell you that people from really every corner of this planet understand the importance of this. And even if, maybe in different countries, the conversation still has to begin, or it's a different stage of development, it's such a strong and simple message that I think they can really cross borders in a very effective way.
And just so you know, for everyone listening, sorry, Andrea, just so you know, I'm sharing the link to the Truth and Reconciliation Conversations website for you to be able to participate, share your stories, and participate in the effort that Khalil is leading. So if you're on Facebook, I'm posting it there. On Zoom, I'm posting it there. Participate, take a video, upload it, send it to them.
You know, one of the things in my work, I'm sorry, go ahead, Andre.
No, go.
No, one of the things in my work, when we talked about the prison part, like in my work, having served 20 years in prison, one of the realizations that I had with respect to truth and reconciliation conversations is that I had to be willing to be truthful with myself. I had to be willing to look at my own life and ask some really tough questions about, for example, how did I land in prison? What was it that shaped my thinking and my actions so severely in that direction where I ended up in prison? Now, I could very easily say to you that given the systemic injustice and racism and historical oppression in America, that it's pretty predictable, it's pretty much inevitable that someone like me would end up in prison. And that's a narrative that's widely heard, widely believed. And I would say there's truth in it. But it would be deeply dishonest if I told you that was the driving reason for my incarceration. You see, it's hard to have this kind of conversation because we have stories about what it means that we're deeply attached to, that we're emotionally attached to, which justifies our political views and all kinds of other things. But I'm going to tell you this. I understood that there were choices I made that contributed directly to my incarceration. In fact, what I'm going to tell you is that I recognized during my incarceration that I had been in prison long before I was arrested. Let me unpack that for you. When I say I was in prison long before I was arrested, I'm saying that I had internalized views about my own life that limited my sense of choices, my sense of options, my sense of my own power. I had internalized views about my powerlessness that simply were untrue. I recognized that there were a number of things about myself that I had internalized from sources that I never even questioned. And the more I began to question what I really believe and what I'm capable of, the story began to change. So in prison, I came to the realization that prison is a metaphor for self-imposed limitations. And that the majority of people who are in prison actually will never see the inside of a jail. We engage in socially sanctioned self-imposed limitations. And because they're socially sanctioned, no one gets arrested for it. In other words, I can walk into a room and for no other reason than the color of your skin, make the most absurd assumptions about you. And if I'm an employer, or if I'm prime minister, or if I'm a teacher at a school, or if I'm a person at a daycare center, or a home for the elderly, if I have internalized views about you that do not honor your humanity, I am operating from a place of prison. That self-imposed limitation, which is the consequence of internalized assumptions, beliefs, views, stories, that we are acting out. And most of it, what I have found, most of it starts in our own homes. Before school, well before school, much of that stuff is shaped in our own homes. And so what I say is that parents teach unintentionally and children learn unconsciously. And because this is happening unintentionally on the part of parents and unconsciously on the part of children, both are deeply wounded by the time the child reaches adulthood or a teenager and has no clue about the kind of work that many of us have to undo, have to overcome.
Let me interject on this, Khalil, because I think in the documentary, and I'm just saying, and then we transition to the viewing, is a very powerful moment. And I'll mention it for those that are going to watch the documentary for the first time. When you are in a youth correctional facilities, or I don't remember the exact setting, you basically ask people there to define themselves with one term, right? And yes. I think that really symbolized your whole speech right now in yes. practice. It showed the positivity and the energy that, you know, changing mindset can bring to all of us. And with that being said, I suggest we move to the viewing of the documentary. There's around an hour. And it's going to be shown here on Zoom, and we're going to stream it also on Facebook. Just one quick question for you, Khalil. If you had one tip or one suggestion for those that are going to watch the documentary for the first time, what would it be?
To be open-minded, simply open-minded to what they hear and what they see. Let judgment be something that they set to the side and just be open-minded.
Amazing. So you heard it, everyone. We're about to watch the documentary. You have to bear with me 2 minutes because I'm not a very techie person and I have to manage to stream it on Zoom. But keep your mind and your eyes open. I promise it's worth it. I'll ask Khalil to mute himself throughout. Everyone can interact in the chat on Zoom and on Facebook. We'll be also taking comments for the discussion after. Please let me know in the chat if there's any issue with the connection, because all of this is based on my connection. And since we're in lockdown, I'm working from home, so it's making it a bit harder than expected. I'm going to try to stream it now. So again, bear with me because this is not my area of forte. Sorry, this is going to take 2 minutes. My computer needs to accept to collaborate.
In the meanwhile, I can mention that we have a comment from Tunisia on Facebook, say that this person is very, very excited for the documentary. He never heard of Truth and Reconciliation before, and it sounds like a very interesting concept for his country as well. I mean, obviously, also Tunisia suffers from many of the colonialistic consequences that we discussed before, and I think that
I'm ready to go.
Let's go.
I'm cutting you.
whether we can say COVID, Black Lives Matter that has happened in America, it's a wake-up call not just for African American people, it's a wake-up call for all of us as human beings.
And it took me to a place where I was just reading a sports article, really. I thought it was just about sports. No, it was my favorite sports writer, who was a black man, who was talking about, hey, why is it my white friends can talk to me about the NBA finals, they can call me and have a chat about anything in the sports world, but this really important topic comes up, and then where are they? And I read that and I went, I don't want that to be me.
I went to a high school that had one African American in my graduating class. I had no relationship to understand any of the issues and the pain and the struggle, you would get in relationships of friends.
If we are going to have a conversation about what is happening right now, we're going to have a conversation about racism. It exists in schools. Schooling is an institution in this country. It exists in schools.
Now we acknowledge the racist history of felon disenfranchisement in this country. We acknowledge that. But we did not allow ourselves to be just defined just by that moment in history.
When we talk about, again, the public trust and reconciliation and the power of recognizing mistake and being accountable for mistakes, that's not just individually, that's systems, institutions.
In my case, my mother did ask me, had I committed that crime? And I did tell my mother I did, and my mother had me arrested. So I knew that I was responsible for something. I knew that I had to take accountability. And that's the thing that I'm actually saying that all of us need to do. Have the courage to say you're responsible for what you've done, and then have the courage to do something different. That's what reconciliation is. That's where restoration has to happen. Restorative justice is about that. I've been asked on more than one occasion why 67 minutes and what is its association with Nelson Mandela International Day. For me, 67 minutes is actually the heart of what Nelson Mandela Day is. It represents his 67 years of sacrifice and struggle for freedom, justice, and human rights. I can't think of anything better that we can do than to honor that kind of legacy. So this year, we have put together a documentary which poses a question. What in this historic moment with overlapping crises of COVID-19 and civil unrest, what from Nelson Mandela's legacy could they draw from that's instructive in this historic moment? And specifically, how has the issue of systemic racism impacted them? The goal is to challenge people to be reflective about their own truth, to challenge people to be courageous with sharing their truth in a way that uplifts others.
As you virtually celebrate Nelson Mandela International Day, you should not lose hope, because the power is within all of us to make this a better world. It is even worse with the issue of systematic racism in the US, but it's a problem that plagues the whole world, not just the US. Even us as South Africa still experience systematic racism, and not to mention the issue of those who are poor, who do not have anything, and it's worse for them under this pandemic. However, as I say, I'd like to read you words of comfort from my dad, Nelson Mandela, who in April 26, 1990, uttered these words: "Our single most important challenge is to help establish a social order in which freedom of the individual will truly mean the freedom of the individual. We must construct a people-centered society of freedom in such a manner that it guarantees the political liberties and the human rights of all our citizens, not just a few. Our definition of freedom is the freedom of an individual, and it must be instructed by the fundamental objective to restore human dignity of all citizens in the world. This requires that we speak not only of political freedom, but freedom from want, freedom from hunger, freedom from deprivation, freedom from ignorance, because that's why we have racial injustice, because it's the ignorance of people of the other. Freedom from suppression and freedom from fear. Fear that as a black man, you have to be cautious where you go. We want to live in the world where that freedom is guaranteed. These freedoms are the fundamental to the guarantee of human dignity of all citizens. On this Mandela International Day, I beseech all goodwill citizens of the world to join together to provide hope and a better life for all. Only when we open our hearts and our minds through education of our consciousness can we truly transform our societies. We should, my dear friends, show empathy and compassion for those who are not like us and those who are poor.
You doing? Yes, good. I've taken off my mask, so I'm gonna talk low so as to make sure I do proper social distancing with you. But I want to just, first of all, as I was saying this morning, I don't take it for granted that just because you're here and in this facility that you have to come out here and listen to me, especially come out here with an attitude of an open mind. But what I'm going to talk to you today about, the title of my talk today, what I'm going to share with you, it's called Turn the Cell into a Classroom, Turn the Prison into a University. So at 22 to 25, I was on a crime spree. When I got arrested, the judge looked at me. He said, "Young man, I spent 2 days trying to figure out how to sentence you. Man, my only regret is I cannot give you more time." He sentenced me to a maximum sentence of 75 years. I was 25 years old. I was 40 years old by the time I got out of prison. 15. And the 5 before that served a total of 20 years. While I was in prison the second time, I earned my bachelor's and master's degree from Boston University. You've already been told how powerless you are. You've already been told how the system is against you. You've already been told that it's going to be almost impossible to succeed. That's not my message. I recognize there's systemic injustice. I recognize that there's systemic racism. I recognize all those things, but here's what I want you to know that's more powerful than that. You. I want everyone in the room share one word that best describes you. One word that best describes you. I'm gonna go around. Generous. Humble. Determined. Determined squared. Intelligent. Smart. Optimistic. Intelligent. Talented. Confident. Outgoing. Now listen to this. Of the words that were selected, not one person said lacking self-esteem, lacking self-discipline, lacking any of those things. You know why? Because when you're asked your best, you know what it is. You know what your best is. I have an organization called Reflecting Freedom Network. And with this organization, we created a program around education, accredited education, and employment training. So we have what's called a Nelson Mandela International Day Scholarship. I've already got scholarships for everyone here. All of you already have it. You didn't know it walking into the room, but you already have a scholarship for the program. So it is 100% free to you. But here's what this is why I say to you, that part is the easy part. I'm removing every barrier that might make it difficult for you to succeed. That's the easy part, because I've been down this path. The most important part for you is going to be to do the work to earn it. That's right. That's right. Staying focused, carrying it through, not getting distracted, doing the work. You are more powerful than anything that has been created to destroy you. You are born to a destiny greater than any force that would come to destroy that destiny. And I'm committed to using my life and my resources to ensure that you have an opportunity to pursue the highest vision you have of yourself, because you deserve it. But you got to earn it. I can provide you with the opportunity. You're only going to get the outcome if you earn it. Let's do something extraordinary. Nelson Mandela said it always seems impossible until it's done. Let's do the impossible. Hi, Melissa. How are you today?
I'm well. I'm well.
Good. Well,
It's nice to see you.
It's great to see you. And first, I'd just like to hear what you think about reconciliation, especially in this turbulent time.
I think it is important, and I think it is powerful. And I certainly think, from my vantage point as a stakeholder in the criminal justice system, so often the justice system denies people harmed and people who offend the opportunity for reconciliation. And I know it can make all the difference. So I believe in it. I've always believed personally the power of I'm sorry. I believe it in my own life. I try to teach my children the power of both being able to say I'm sorry and the power to grant forgiveness. So I think reconciliation, I agree that it is something that has to come from within. It can't be forced. It can't be dictated by policy. But when it's genuine and when it does come from within people, what can come from it is incredible.
Wow.
It's peace that can come from it.
Exactly. And you know, when I think about your role in the context of the criminal justice system, it's, as a state attorney, it's a very powerful role. It's a role I think of the major stakeholders when we're having conversations about criminal justice reform. And for me, the prosecutor's role is central. And do you see it that way?
I do. The prosecutor has immense power. And really within the confines of the law, but really enormous discretion. and how the prosecutor uses that power and that discretion can either further engender healing in a community, trust in the system, or if abused, it can have the opposite effect. So it's the prosecutor and the power that the prosecutor yields is incredibly important. That's why people who hold these positions of public trust have to maintain that trust. So we have to ensure that we are using our power and our discretion fairly, equitably, appropriately, and where we fail or make a mistake that we own it.
Knowing the fact that you have done this work on the ground, confronting all kinds of obstacles, people on all sides of the aisle politically, people with labels that it's very easy to call racist, who would be identified as part of the system of systemic racism, and yet you found a way to break through. And not just anecdotally or on a personal level, you found a way to break through and move the needle on criminal justice reform in the face of systemic racism. So for me, what you have done eclipses everything that we say systemic racism is intended to diminish. So I'd like your insight, Desmond, on how you took a path to confront systemic racism in the way that you did and to be so successful in doing so.
Wow. You know, just listening to you, I'm reflecting on what we were able to accomplish and how you're talking about probably one of the most controversial topics, of voting rights to people with felony convictions in the most controversial state, the state of Florida. Yeah. Actually, it's 3 states. Some people say it's 3 states in one. At a time or in an environment that breathed hate, fear, division, right? But yet we were able to actually, I guess, dice through all of that and emerge from that cesspool, right, with a victory that was just shrouded in love, forgiveness, and redemption, right? Where we were able to actually have people from all walks of life, all political persuasions, actually support this, right? And I tell folks that we had over 5.1 million people who voted for, our amendment, and that's 1 million more than voted for any person on that ballot. And we know that at least 1 million people who voted for Amendment 4 also voted for our current governor, which shows a wide cross-section of support. And so those votes was not based on hate, they weren't based on fear. They was rather based on love. I think what was so important, right, was to be able to cut through, right? Now we acknowledge the racist history of felon disenfranchisement in this country. We acknowledge that. But we did not allow ourselves to be just defined just by that moment in history. Yes. But rather, we allow ourselves to actually expand that to include so many people, because the reality was, even though the original intent of felon disenfranchisement was specifically to target newly freed slaves, yes, right? The reality is, like a tumor left unchecked, it would grow throughout the rest of the body, and now everyone is infected, right? Absolutely. And so we were able to actually now show that there was like so much interconnectivity, which in a sense helped kind of knife through the racism, because the racism is really a limited sense of thinking, right? So we were able to actually elevate above that. And what transcends the racism to me is love.
Yes.
Right? And so be able to connect these people with someone who they loved, who was impacted by the system, and have them mobilize and organize around that with that thought in their head. And so it wasn't a primal response that was triggered in people when they thought about criminal justice, they thought about African Americans. You know, no, when they thought about criminal justice, they thought about someone who they loved, right? And that's who they stood up for, and that's who they fought for. And we were able to be successful because of that.
First of all, I just think that that is such a brilliant analysis and strategy in terms of how we build effective mass-based movements for justice, for social justice and human rights. And when you were saying that, I was just thinking of how Operation New Hope, Kevin, being aligned with the same principles of social justice, the same principles of restorative justice. And the work you've been doing and how we went to South Africa, and Dr. Mandela was absolutely overwhelmed. As we're looking at these protests and the whole idea of systemic racism, how has it impacted you? What has occurred to you in this historic moment with this incredible challenge to face racism like we never have before?
Well, you know, kind of going back, so we started 21 years ago, right? When we began to do our work here in the urban core. And you used the word earlier, Desmond, which I think is so powerful, that proximity. We have to have something that either pulls us or how somehow we have this ability to get closer. Sometimes it's by accident, you know, sometimes it is through the connection of love. It happens in a number of different ways. You don't even know how that systemic structural racism builds itself through conversation, by observance of other people that you love and that you hold in such high regard, acting in a way. And it's not necessarily that really horrific thing. It's the little subtleties, the nuances of not saying something, or wow, you were in a conversation and you didn't challenge somebody on that. And that is something that as you grow older and you're around that part of it. And so all of that was embedded in me. And so I went to a high school that had one African American in my graduating class. I had no relationship to understand any of the issues and the pain and the struggle that you would get in relationships of friends. And so 21 years ago, I went to my boss and I said, my dad, and I said, look, I just need to do something. I need some time to, to kind of explore some ideas. And that's when we started Operation Hope in 99. But I didn't know really anything, from the standpoint of these issues. And we started building houses. Initially, it was just about creating affordable housing. I didn't understand the nuances around what we had done, some of the components of systemic racism, what banks had done to redline. This area we're sitting was one of those areas. African Americans had to walk around this community, back 70 years ago. But now we were building houses here that were both, primarily for people of color. But what I began to see, what our organization began to see, was just all of the component pieces that had been born. I didn't know anything about the criminal justice issue, one of the other components of that systemic piece that I experienced in a big way. But when we began to do the credit to look at how we could get families and families of color into housing that we were building in urban core, just the impact of not having health insurance, and you have a kid or a family member that goes to Shands Hospital or goes to one of the hospitals with an emergency and then has a $80,000 bill that nobody's paying, and what stays on the credit for their entire life. Yeah. And nobody has really acknowledged the fact, because of healthcare, now they've got a blemish that precludes somebody from having that American dream, the dream of home ownership. Yeah. But we got to see that in the thousands of families that we worked with. That was one of the major components. And so, these are the little things that are, that are hitting. But what got me the most was, I began, as we were building these houses, we'd see every single day these young men and women, and a lot of people of color, were coming and saying, hey, do you need any help? Can we work on your job? And we would bring them on, because we were nonprofit and we were trying to rebuild a community. We bring folks in, and then in time, to your point on that proximity piece, you know, I was hearing the same story that these young men were telling me about. I'd say, well, why aren't you working anywhere? Tell me a little bit. Well, I had a charge 3 or 4 years ago or 2 years ago, and people won't hire me. I'm like, what? You know, right, duh. But I kept hearing that story over and over again, and it really touched me. So I went back to the board and said, look, there's something powerful going on here, because what I learned is if I took on and brought in a young man and they worked for a couple of weeks, I could pick up the phone and call anybody in town, any contractor, and said, hey, by the way, I've got John over here, young man, he's got a record, but he's been showing up every day on time. I'll see him right now. Right. Now, if John would have gone and called on that guy on his own, on the slim to none, we know where that would have been. Right. And so I began to see, wow, just how hard it is to break, right? And also I said, for whatever reason, we had the ability to advocate on behalf of those who didn't have an advocate. Right. And it empowered us. I mean, our board, we ended up starting a nonprofit construction company so we could control our own destiny. We could hire who we wanted to hire. And that's when we began this move. But I got to tell you, it really touched my heart in the most incredible way, because I saw all these young men who were just like me. Right.
Kent, it's good to see you again.
It's mutual.
Yeah, it's last year. It's almost been, it's
been a year now.
A year. Nelson Mandela International Day last year, and the conversation with Dr. Mandela.
Yeah.
It was amazing. But look at how much has happened since then. COVID-19.
And we thought that was going to be the biggest deal of 2020.
Yeah.
No, not even close.
But I understand that you have started a conversation series.
Yeah.
A kind of truth and reconciliation conversations focused on how we can better understand each other. Yeah. And address this issue of racism and difference. Yeah. And ethnic divide. So I'm curious, Kent, with the position that you have of being an anchor and comfortable, a wonderful career and family, what inspired you personally to want to start this conversation series?
So I didn't intend to start a conversation series, but it became clear to me that conversations needed to happen. That's because one of my very dearest friends here in Jacksonville is a man who was struggling through that first week after George Floyd had been killed, who is a person I look up to and who is a leader and who I had never seen been anything other than sure of his course in life. But we had a conversation on that Friday of that week after everything had happened in Minnesota. Friday of that week, he said, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to tell my adult children who live in Atlanta and who are scared to go outside right now. And it started the conversation, just him and me, about his experience as a black man, as a leader of a black family. And I wanted to understand more. And it really, that was kind of the inspiration there. One friend who said, I'm struggling with this and I don't know what to say. And it took me to a place where I was just reading a sports article, really. I thought it was just about sports. No, it was my favorite sports writer, who was a black man, who was talking about, hey, why is it my white friends can talk to me about the NBA finals, they can call me and have a chat about anything in the sports world, but this really important topic comes up, and then where are they? And I read that and I went, I don't want that to be me. I don't want to be silent on something that is so important. So that's really what started it. And out of that moment, Khalil, I just went, okay, I'm going to call those friends that I have who may look different than me, and I'm going to say, I don't know what to say, but I'm going to say to you, I care about you. You are my friend no matter what, and especially when we're talking about there are differences because of how we look, I want you to know that I'm on your side. The way these have gone has really, I enticed people to come, hey, we'll have some food, some beverage, and we will have a discussion here. A discussion about racial reconciliation is mandatory for whoever comes. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I'll usually start that, hey, let's talk some ground rules. Here's how we're going to discuss this. Yes. And we're going to be great listeners. And we're going to listen for, and we're going to look for these things. And what I've found, Khalil, is that the conversation goes on its own for an hour or an hour and a half of people offering their experiences, offering their perspectives. And what's really cool is sometimes asking questions, hey, tell me more about that, because I don't see it that way. And just as powerful, oh, I just heard your perspective. I've never encountered that, and now my eyes are open. I see around me people who are on their own saying, oh, I need to look at this differently. Oh, I feel this differently. My neighbor came to one of our conversations, and during a conversation about the monuments coming down in Jacksonville, we're saying, hey, wait a second, I don't understand this. And as I've heard in other conversations, led his comments with, I don't have a racist bone in my body, yes, but, and then gave their opinion. And it struck me, just didn't realize maybe a racist bone in his body. Yes. And at the end of that conversation, at the end of that evening, this person told me, Ken, I'm going to have a hard time sleeping tonight. Oh, yeah. Because I didn't realize that I viewed it in that way. And now that I've heard people explain to me why that's offensive, why that's painful, why that hurts, I'm forced to look at things differently. And again, it goes back to, we built some relationship over the course of a few hours, and this person sharing their experience and this person sharing theirs, saying, huh, okay, I can understand it differently.
Dr. Brown, it's really an honor to be able to talk with you today. This is a conversation for me that has so much significance in this historic moment. And so knowing the civil unrest and the backdrop of all the things happening in our country, I'm reminded that Nelson Mandela said, in the end, reconciliation is a spiritual process, which requires more than just a legal framework. It has to happen in the hearts and minds of people. When I think about that, and I look at your life and I look at the work that you're doing in education, given your positioning at this historic moment in an amazing school like KIPP, what do you think are the lessons from the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela that are instructive in this historic moment?
We can't legislate reconciliation, right? And reconciliation requires us to be proximate to one another. It requires us to be up close and personal. Up close and personal increases the opportunities that we're going to offend one another. We're going to bump into each other, run over one another, trip. It's messy, right? The work of reconciling is messy. There's so many components to it. It involves an acknowledgement that something wrong has occurred, right? For which we need to be reconciled to one another. And you're right, we are at this pivotal moment in human history. And I think we're just getting started in this moment. I don't think that any of this is going to die down. The protests might, but I think that this is long work that's going to continue to happen. And I've been thinking a lot, looking internally, doing lots of introspection, leading my organization, the schools, the school leaders, teachers to be introspective as well. If what Nelson Mandela says is true, and this is a spiritual endeavor, we must turn inward first, right? We got to turn inward. And I'm thinking right now, Khalil, about where I fit in all of this. What's my part? What's been my part in perpetuating?
Wow.
What's been my part in perpetuating it, even as a Black woman? What's been my part in perpetuating it? What do I do? What's my responsibility to dismantle? So I'm thinking a lot about that and pushing us as an institution of schools where, oh, by the way, if we are going to have a conversation about what is happening right now, we're going to have a conversation about racism. It exists in schools. Schooling is an institution in this country. It exists in schools. So I'm pushing myself to really examine ourselves, examine our decision-making, our motivation, our mindsets. This is an unprecedented time in history, and not just because of the pandemic. And how do I lead right now? Because it is messy, and I'm gonna say some things, if I'm being my authentic self, yes. I'm gonna say some things that folks in my organization are going to be uncomfortable with. So how do I lead in this moment? How do I lead? Love is my default. Lead with love is my default. And loving does not preclude truth-telling. So I banked on, these folks have known me for 5 years now. I've been here for 5 years. And if they really know me, then they know my heart for children. They know my heart for this work. So I shouldn't have to do a lot of explaining because I've been leading in this way for 5 years. And I had to say, mattering is the minimum for Black folks. Mattering is the minimum. That's table stakes, that Black people matter, the lives of Black people matter. I need everyone who works here to be committed to Black people winning and being successful. So not just the children that we are educating, and yes, we want to see that in, test scores and in their academic performance. Bring that same fervor to how you feel about the communities that they go home to. Do you want their families to win? Because that's going to be requisite of your employment here. You got to want Black people to win and be successful. Mattering is a low threshold. That's a low bar. I'm doubling down on my commitment to racial equity, racial justice and equity. I'm doubling down. And here's what that's going to look like. I know those are words that can live up at 30,000 feet, but on the ground, here's what that's going to look like for us at KIPP Jacksonville Schools. We're going to go back and look at all of our talent practices and policies and make sure they're equitable. We're going to examine every facet of ourselves, how we choose to spend our money, where, with whom, the curricula that we select for children. Do they see themselves in the curricula? The disciplinary policies that we create, are they harmful? Like, are we perpetuating anti-Black policies? We're not going to do that. We can't say that we love our students and love their communities and then bring them into an environment where we are actually causing the trauma. We can't do that. So my leadership in this moment is loving us, loving the children and their communities enough to turn the microscope on ourselves and say, we got to sit under this microscopic gaze and analyze every decision that we make. I'm not a politician, I'm an educator. So that's where I'm gonna fight this battle. I'm gonna do it in schools. And for me, the road to reconciliation starts with listening.
25 years ago, you're looking at the problem. 25 years ago, I looked at a distance in our community and assumed a whole lot of all those conversations that I had heard in the past. Oh, so-and-so don't want to work, don't want to take care of the family, all of that. It was embedded, whether I liked it or not. But it all came face to face when I saw these young folks, and I will never ever, no matter what I do, understand that pain that you guys have gone through and people of color in those conversations. I can't, but I saw the blood in their footsteps as they walked away, Khalil. I saw that part of it, but I also saw in that this incredible resilience and this desire to be successful. Yes. And so, all that, and so you talking about becoming, animated in this process, it became, kind of the life mission for me, but it took these folks and the patience that these young folks had with me and others to say, okay, I need to explain this, which is a part of the problem that I'm still trying to reconcile in my own spirit, that it took so long to get to that place. COVID has created a space, as crazy as this time is for all of us with the civil unrest that we have and with the pandemic that's there. God, he doesn't create these moments, but he does create the opportunities for us in these moments to slow down and to pay attention. And I think the whole world right now is paying attention. And as I shared with you guys before we got on camera, the most beautiful part of this has been seeing, like, my niece, and her friends carrying Black Lives Matters posters, that their heart has been touched. And to see that, and to see that love where it should be.
With the unrest, I want to juxtapose this with the marches that are happening right now. And knowing the emphasis that you've put on trust between communities and our legal system, our criminal justice system. How is this impacting you in your office?
Great question. In really profound ways, frankly. So internally, we are having lots of discussions about how people feel personally, what their personal experiences are about both the civil unrest and the demands, at least, of local demonstrators that specifically implicate our office and the work of our office. And those conversations sometimes are hard to have, but they're really important. And so externally, it's also the local demonstrations and the demands on our office specifically have really forced us to circle around the table and think about important issues that, frankly, were not on our priority agenda even 6 weeks ago, but are now. And so I have been, several weeks ago, I came to the office to watch a demonstration, and I will tell you, I was so moved by, in gratitude that I live in a country where we enjoy such freedom and the right to petition, that people can petition their government, and then the government can react. And we specifically, as it relates to, for example, the public release of body-worn camera footage, a very important topic, trending both nationally but locally as well. We've listened to the petitions of the people and are working to develop a policy that will actually be responsive to the petitions of the people. And so I, in watching this, at least locally, I've really felt a sense of gratitude for living in a country where this can occur. That said, I've also been sad to hear about some of the personal experiences of colleagues that have been my colleagues for a long time that I never knew about until conversations have been spurred because of this moment we find ourselves in.
Wow. So a level of honesty and openness
Sure.
to talk about race and diversity.
And the intersection of race and the justice system, and certainly, to your point, diversity.
Yes. Because I know the work that you have been doing in the space of criminal justice reform that goes beyond this moment. I know that it's not something that's just a fanciful kind of issue for you. I'm aware of the legislatively funded conviction review unit that you spearheaded. I'd actually like you to talk a little bit about that, because I think so often it's easy to just pigeonhole responses to what's going on, or it's easy to say someone's just doing something as a reaction to the moment. But I'd like to tease out your motivation for spearheading that legislatively funded initiative, which is leading the country actually in this space.
So when we talk about, again, the public trust and reconciliation, and the power of recognizing mistake and being accountable for mistakes, that's not just individually, that's systems, institutions. And so it was important to me and my administration that words can be empty, and this was a sign that we take this very seriously. And we did not seek the funding or set up this unit either for a PR stunt, and we didn't do it because we thought that there had been a great swath of mistakes we needed to rectify. What we didn't know, but we did it because we wanted people to have faith that where mistakes have been made, and this is a human system that depends on humans, and we all make mistakes, so that where we as a system had made mistakes, we were willing to review them and rectify them. We didn't know where the effort would lead us. As you are very familiar, it led us to overturn the convictions of two men who'd been in prison for almost 43 years, wrongfully convicted, and released from prison. And so I really think and hope that the public knows when when they're in a courtroom, when they're on the other side of us, adverse to us, that they have faith no matter the outcome, that we are acting with integrity. That's really important. And so this effort was important to that end, and it's important certainly for those two men, Nathan Myers and Clifford Williams.
Yes, and he said his prayers over all those years. He wept as he told the story, and Dr. Mandela last year was so moved by that story and the action that you took that she personally gave Clifford a set of the Struggle series, artwork from her father. So
it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, she was just in tears, and she said her comment was that this is how justice can work.
And I struggle when we talk about this is how justice can work. I'm like, what is just about the fact that they lost decades of their lives that we can't get back? And they're both so optimistic about that there was a purpose.
Yes.
They're an instrument of something larger.
Yes.
And all that they lost and sacrificed was for meaning that maybe we can't fully understand right now. But certainly the value and the initiative of the conviction integrity is borne out in those two men.
Melissa, to hear these stories as people talk about racism and injustice and personal stories, the personal things? How has it affected you?
It's made me wonder why I didn't know about these things before. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I didn't ask about it before. Or was there a space where people felt comfortable to talk about their personal experiences? And it's underscored for me how important diversity within our ranks is, not just in race and gender, though that's very important, but in life experience. Because if we all share a very similar life experience and see the world through a very similar lens, and we don't reflect the community that we are sworn to serve every day, that's not good for anybody. And so it's really also underscored the importance of, in our recruitment efforts, melding a incoming class that demonstrates a spectrum of life experience. I think that's important.
How do you think we should revise the policies on juvenile justice, right? And I told him, I said, listen, I'm not the expert. I have some members of my organization that have been direct filers juveniles and been working on this issue. I would be happy to have you speak with them. But let me give you a starting point, right? And here was a very simple starting point. For anyone that wanted to fix a policy, a change of policy or a condition, it was very simple. I looked at the gentleman, you know what I told him? Imagine if your son made a transgression, how would you want him to be treated? And that would set the foundation for the policies that you should advocate for, right? Now, that connection there was love. The action, the initial action that I use for others is to connect them with someone who they love, right? I'm not expecting them to love me immediately, right? They may reject me because of the color of my skin, but that initial seed is connecting them to someone that they love. And so when I would approach a person that could have biases, racial biases, and I have, and I've approached people with political biases, I have, right? It wasn't a question about the politics. It wasn't a question about me. The question was, do you have someone who you love who ever made a mistake? And that oriented them, right, around love, and it was an immediate connection with someone that they had a relationship with. And that was the guiding force. So in spite of any negative ads, in spite of any contrary narrative, what they had as their North Star was the love of someone that they cared about or that was close to them. And in that love, that allows them now to get in a space to where we can have even further communication, and that person now develops a love, not only for the person that's close to them, but someone else who just entered into their universe.
So when we look at this broader context of civil unrest and you're saying the listening, this courageous listening, we both know in the education space, children are always listening.
That's right.
When we think they're not listening, they're listening.
Yes.
So, and they're listening to things that we don't think we're telling them.
That's right. That's
right? So they've been hearing, I can't breathe. They've been hearing, they've been listening to the words, I can't breathe. How have you, as an educator and a leader in this space, how have you addressed that with the young people, the young lives, the impressionable souls that you are guiding?
Oof. Can I start with the big people first?
Yes.
And then we'll talk about the little people. So March early March, we ended up, of course, having to leave the school buildings due to COVID-19 and were remote for 9 weeks up until the end of the school year. And about 2 weeks before the end of the school year, the murder of George Floyd occurred. And everything, we've all been watching everything that has ensued since then. And Khalil, I was wrestling with how to lead the adults because school ended.
Yes.
And I'm wrestling with, it's gonna be summer break. Teachers need the summer break. They've just been through the most tumultuous end to a school year ever. They need a summer break. There's some of us who work year round, but we had, I think, one of the most powerful team meetings we've ever had in 5 years that I've been here. And it was differentiated. So I said to the Black folks on the team, this is your question to answer. How are you prioritizing your peace and your healing? That's your question. White teammates, here's your question. How are you addressing racism with your white friends, family members, with white community? How are you addressing that? And it was such a powerful conversation that we ended up having. I think years of trust building helped facilitate the ease of that conversation. But at the end of the call, one of our Black men on staff, he is the epitome of tough guy. He's on our operations team, so very logistical, starts talking and talks about rage, the Baldwin quote. Yes. To be a Negro and relatively conscious in America is to be almost always in a state of rage. So he talks about this, how he's just angry right now. And then he breaks down in tears on a call there are 30 of us on this call. He breaks down into tears because he's talking about his son, Max. He and his wife have an 18-month-old baby. And he breaks down into tears and he says, I am so fearful that somebody will look at him, make a judgment about Max. There's nothing I can do to protect him. And I'm like, I don't even get to enjoy being a father because I'm already worried that somebody will take his life. And I was messed up. And I have heard my husband say this all the time. I have a stepson who's grown, and I've heard my husband replay over and over encounters with the police, his worries for his own son. And in a moment, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this might not have been the right conversation for us to have. I don't want this Black man to be out here now, his pain vulnerable and visible for everybody. And then I thought, I wonder how many of our white teammates have ever seen a Black man that they know intimately, up close and personal, weep out of fear that he can't protect his son, that he doesn't even get to enjoy fatherhood. That's what I mean, Khalil, when I say listening. It's got to start with the listening. It's raw. It is painful. They needed that. My white teammates needed that. Some of the Black men needed that because they don't even have the words to articulate their fear, their rage, how powerless they feel.
I do believe, though, that we human beings have the innate ability to rise above our limitations. And our limitations often are based on discrimination, on anger, on fear, on bitterness, and we can rise above that by always existing in an environment and atmosphere of love, by waking up every morning and looking at ourselves in the mirror and asking, Mikey, how are you going to be better today than you were yesterday? What is the one thing today that you are going to do that is good, that is going to make somebody's life better? It might be just saying hello. Those little acts of kindness that we have to express on a daily basis. And these are not things that are foreign to us as human beings, because this concept of Ubuntu that we South Africans pride ourselves is about caring, which Nelson Mandela actually preached and lived throughout his life. Because when he was president, he gave a third of his salary away. He made sure that he built schools because he believed in education for everybody, and that's how you uplift the poor out of poverty, by giving them a hand up, which is giving them access to education.
You know, it's not the destination, it's the journey, and understanding that the work that we do, we're gonna make mistakes along the way, right? We're gonna get some setbacks, we're gonna have some victories, but we don't stop there, right? Because this is a process that's ongoing. And I think that that's the beauty of it, you know, and I think we embrace that, you know, because that, you know, it's the journey that I think that can bring us together, right? And the more people we can have going on this journey, oh my God, the greater the experience.
When everybody's asking that question right now, black and white, is this going to be another moment in time where nothing changes? We've got such a tremendous roadmap in what Nelson Mandela did in South Africa. You know, the yoke of apartheid was heavy, and it took a lot, you know, uncomfortability between, to say the least, between the blacks and the whites in South Africa. And the persistence that Nelson Mandela and all of those folks that were with him in the movement never let go. There was that consistency, that intentionality. I only hope and pray that that's where we are today. And I believe it will be. I believe it will be if we continue these conversations.
And one of the biggest wins, if you will, out of this is a friend who told me just last weekend, Ken, I'm glad we had that conversation a couple of weekends ago, because I've realized I need forgiveness for this. I've thought about this the wrong way. I didn't think about it at the time, but I acted that way. I need forgiveness for this. And it's been powerful, because there's an awakening or something going on for so many of us, so many of our neighbors who say, I guess maybe I'm open to looking at this a different way now. Yes. And that's huge.
That's the work. It's hard work, it's painful work. I'm not even qualified to take us through those conversations, but they have to happen. It means that I am going to hear some things that make me angry, sorrowful, and I'm going to have to listen to folks who might be in different stages of a journey than I am, and listen with compassion, and listen with a lot of grace and patience. So for me, it all starts with the listening. And then from the listening, maybe we become curious, because we actually stopped talking enough to seek to understand one another. And if I become curious, then I might actually want to learn something. And, you know, we got this quote downstairs on the first floor: education is the most powerful weapon with which we can change the world. And it's not just the education that happens in the formal, you know, K through 12 or through college. That education can happen anywhere. But for me, it really does start with listening. That's how we get to reconciliation.
When I think about truth and reconciliation, one of the things that comes to mind for me is that forgiveness takes one person, reconciliation two. The idea of truth and reconciliation is that regardless of the fact that many of us come to this conversation with irreconcilable experiences, truth and reconciliation conversations invites us to be courageous listeners. It invites us to be compassionately empathetic, hearing the stories of others, hearing their experiences with racism. Then what we're able to do with truth and reconciliation conversations is begin a process of healing that moves us beyond the woundedness and allows us to hear in each other's voice our shared humanity. Yes.
So powerful. I mean, I saw it twice now, and it gives me chills every time. And I think that, I don't want to steal the show, but amazing, amazing job.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I think we received a lot of questions that I can share with you in a minute, but I do want to give a quick comment on everything we just saw.
Yeah, well, I think one of the key ideas that came out of everything that we did during this documentary was how much people were discovering or rediscovering their power to make a difference, to use their voice, to make a stand for what they believed in. And that you heard repeatedly that they were motivated by love, that there was that on a personal level, their passion moved them to action. So it's important to see that these were just ordinary people from everyday life who exercised the power they had as individuals to make a difference with the people whose lives they touched. And I'm saying the real kind of point of the documentary is to say it's happening everywhere. All we did was capture some of it, but it's happening and it's growing exponentially. So we never have to worry about, are there other people doing it, or are we alone? No, listen, there's other people doing it. We're not alone. What we need to do is work in a more clear way towards organizing our efforts. And that's when we begin to exercise another level of power to effect the kind of change that we agree is important for us to have and to live with as human beings. So those were people that we did this documentary with that no one who was watching it probably had ever heard of them, and yet you come away from that seeing how much they're like you, they're like me. You know, they're people who could They did nothing that any of us who watched them could do. Every one of us could do that amount. Many of us can do much more. So that's the point.
No, and I think it ties, you started the conversation today saying all power starts with self-perception, right?
Yes.
And I think this really ties it back together, the idea, and you just mentioned, those people are everyday people. I didn't hear them before. But just like every single one of us, we have the power from the moment we accept it to start having those conversations. As you said at the end, be courageous listeners. I really like this way of putting it, and actually start affecting change. It's just a matter of choosing to stop being bystanders and start having the conversation, and then understanding how to go from there. As you said also at the beginning, I think everyone has a different role to play. We all have different strengths, different weaknesses, and different skills. Some people are organizers, some people are policymakers. It's about understanding how we can all add to this monument to make the world a better place, stop racism, and so on.
Yes. And that's the power of now. That's where we have an ability to organize our efforts. Look, the essence of all of the work that I'm doing, it focuses on citizen engagement. If I had to sum up, where is this going? What is the aim? What do we hope to accomplish? We want to build citizen engagement. We're very clear. We believe that popular culture is a vehicle for building citizen engagement. We're clear that popular culture really is just a way of speaking to shared experiences. It's like the anger that was expressed towards rap music early on in America was such that people said, this music is outrageous, it's unacceptable. And I simply asked the question, are you more uncomfortable with a description of the reality or the reality? So this is where we are. And the other side of it is the reason why we call these painful conversations, and we say, look, compassionate empathy, we're courageous listening, painful conversations, social reckoning, and spiritual reconciliation those are the 5 steps in our process. But here's the other part that I think is really important to tease out in terms of the power of our conversations and the responsibility that we bring in having the conversation. If we're going to talk about injustice, for me, the fundamental question is not what someone else is doing, but how am I complicitous in it? So my first question is counterintuitive. It is less about what someone else is doing to me, but how do I situate what I am defining as this wrong in my experience? How is it situated? Is it situated as me feeling that I don't have as many opportunities as someone else? Is it situated in such a way that I look at my life and I feel that because I don't have as many opportunities, that I have fewer advantages, I have fewer possibilities? Now, I'll give you an example from my personal experience. When I was coming out of prison, virtually every person in prison with me was in agreement that it was going to be almost impossible for someone like me, having spent 20 years in prison, to get out and then be able to actually expect to do well. I was 40 years old. So everyone explained to me everything I couldn't do. I asked, well, what is possible? They said, well, you can't do this. No one will give you a second chance, all those things. And all of those things were true. It was equally true that there were other options that I had to figure out. So if 90% of the things that are available to the person who hasn't been to prison are not available to me, then I want to figure out how to make my 10% 100. And the bottom line is this: each of us have to figure out what we can do personally on our individual level that matters to us so much that if no one ever paid us for it, no one ever rewarded us for it, no one ever thanked us for it, what is that thing that you are so connected to at the depth of your goodness, at the depth of your sense of purpose, that you will do in the face of any conflict or challenge to it? These are questions, these are existential questions. They actually have consequence when you begin to ask those questions or have conversations about it. I'm not saying that you have an answer necessarily. The conversation becomes the means by which we're able to develop some clarity about how now to respond with greater compassion and certainly with greater dignity as it relates to the person we're choosing to be, the person we aspire to be.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I just want to mention that Andrea texted me. He has some connection issues, so he's trying to rejoin the call. But I think what you said, especially at the beginning, for me really resonated. You know, from the moment you have those conversations, you can actually try to change. I mean, it's not even try. It's people change the way they think and they feel about the issue so quickly.
Yes.
And you mentioned now, but we see it on a daily basis. We have people from more than 100 countries who come together. And I believe that unfortunately having biases, even unconscious, is something that we all have in one way or another. We've been raised with the stories you mentioned. We've heard them through the media. We've heard them through movies and so on. So we all have them.
Yes.
But the moment we start having those conversations, and even beyond, the very tough conversations, from the moment you start interacting, working, living, loving, making friends, people from, it can be different races, genders, nationalities, religion, anything. Those barriers and those prejudices and biases very quickly fall.
Yes.
And it's something incredibly powerful, but for this to happen, you need desegregation, which still exists informally in so many places. We have this wonderful thing called the internet today, which enables us to connect from people from all over the world. We don't even need to travel to the same place. And this is what I think that the work you're doing, really bringing people to share their stories is incredible, because you see in the documentary how quickly people can change their mind and realize that what they've been saying and doing is just wrong and not okay in this place.
Come on, look, think of it when here it is, we met at Athens Democracy Forum. The Democracy and Culture Foundation is doing this amazing work to create a platform focused on democracy, focused on promoting liberal democracy around the world. And if you look at the Democracy and Culture Foundation, their focus is on impact that has two core outcomes: better governance and citizen engagement. That's organizationally their mandate. Well, better governance, I'm not able to ensure that we're going to have better governance in my immediate actions. But what I am able to do is be engaged as a citizen. So citizen engagement is immediately within my reach. And TRC embodies the commitment to building citizen engagement to face racism and heal together. So other organizations like Democracy and Culture Foundation and the Athens Democracy Forum, and people who are doing this work on the ground in Hong Kong, in Venezuela, in South Africa, in France. I mean, people are doing this work everywhere. By having the common opportunity to continue in a process of building our citizen engagement around very concrete objectives, then we're able to actually measure our impact. We're actually able to quantify it. And a lot of people say that they have this thing called algorithms, and everybody understands algorithms, even if they don't understand algorithms. It's like, it's just one of those things that kind of makes sense even when you don't quite know what it is. You can get a person in the most rural area talking about an algorithm. So I'm like, okay, fine, we know algorithms. But my thing is, in as much as I can pick up my phone and once I Google something 3 or 4 times later, I'll get it Googled to me. Here's what I'm thinking. There's an algorithm of kindness. There's a thing that I believe is an algorithm of kindness, of truth and reconciliation. I am convinced that we are always doing things that evidence our human desire, our shared desire for reconciliation when something has happened between us. And so that is what I want to nurture. And not just as a sentiment, but as an organized and institutional action. And so this conversation today, this opportunity to engage, for me is what I think the next step is about.
I see that Andrea is back, and I saw that he posted a few questions, so I don't want to speak again because I've spoken too much. Andrea, if you want to go for it. Is it working, your connection now?
Yes, I think it's working. Sorry if it dropped.
Okay, he seems to be having connection issues. I'll be asking the question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, it's working now.
Yeah, working.
Okay, Andrea, I'll take it then.
Colombe, maybe it's better if you ask her.
You have a delay, I think, of like a couple of seconds. So Andrea posted some of the questions we received throughout the documentary for you. One is, what is the most powerful moment and exchange you had in the documentary, Khalil? Like, with what touched you? And obviously I know that like all of it was extremely powerful, and I imagine that, you know, the broader conversations probably are hundreds of hours of footage. But what is the moment that when you think back on the time really resonates with you personally? You muted, unfortunately, we can't hear you.
With the young men in the St. John's Youth Center, Youth Academy. To be in that place with those young men who, the definition for being there is so debilitating that if you only read the definition of who's there and you never saw those young men or never heard from them, you'd probably think that you were dealing with super predators or something, like hardened criminals, people who clearly have no sense of any goodness about themselves, if you were only to read the definition of what behavior is required of them to be there. So, and I know that that's the message that many of them have heard for most of their lives. They've heard messages about how horrible they are, how bad they are, how worthless they are, how they're going to end up in jail and prison like their father. I mean, they've just heard some horrific messages from a very early age. And if I would have asked them that question, they would have been brutally truthful about that as well. But that's a story, and those are questions that they're always asked. In fact, no one even asks them questions about that anymore. It's drummed out. People make statements about who they are already, as if those statements are permanent. And so for me to reach them at such a deep emotional level, for them to connect, not just with the words of tell me the word that best describes you, the key thing that has to be understood is that each one of those boys who shared the word, they were sharing a story. the word is a metaphor for their story about their goodness. And what I heard was their story.
No, it was incredibly powerful. And I think one of the persons who spoke in the documentary said, you know, in making policies, you have to think about if your son made a transgression, how would you want the system to deal with this? And I think I heard this sentence as well from Clive Stratford-Smith, who's the director of Reprieve. It's an organization that deals with people wrongfully incarcerated or on death row, who said, you know, we all did some pretty bad stuff at one point or another, whether it's illegal actions or just hurting someone we love or being unkind. And would we really want the worst 15 seconds of our lives to define our entire future and our entire life? And you know, when you think about it, the one action that someone commits that is bad and for which they're actually caught, because we all do some bad stuff at one point or another to different levels, but still, do we really want this to define an entire person's worth and life for the rest of their lives? And I think when you think about it in terms of your family, if it was your sister, your brother, your son, or your family, the answer would clearly be no. Like there wouldn't even be a question, right? Because you would see the person in a three-dimensional manner. It wouldn't just be that crime, that action, that moment. It would be that they're worth something much deeper. And I think it's when you see, for me, it was also one of the most beautiful moments in the documentary when you see those people coming out and saying, well, I'm courageous. Self-confidence. I'm kind. I'm generous. And it's really, really powerful.
Yeah, and I remind them of that. And the power of the conversation is that if at some other point we lose sight of it, I remind them. I'm there to say to them, I don't believe you. If you try to tell me that you're unkind, I don't believe you. I remember who you told me you are. Now, you can operate in your distortion if you choose to, but I don't have to participate in your distortion with you. And that's where I'm drawing the line in our relationship. So we have a basis for a conversation that holds both of us accountable in the best possible way.
And that's wonderful to hear. I have a closing question for you. And then I'll read a comment from Kim on the Q&A that I think summarizes a lot of the participants' feelings. But the closing question we got on social media is, what's next for the Truth and Reconciliation efforts after this documentary? So what are you doing next?
Okay, so this process will be that we're engaging in now. We're inviting people, number one, to upload and share their stories with us through our website, Reflecting Freedom Network, and that we're looking to identify some of those stories which would be part of the documentary we premiere on Nelson Mandela International Day 2021. So 2021 will actually be when we premiere all of this. And so we've got a lot of work to do in between now and then, building out these conversations, documenting our network. And on Nelson Mandela International Day 2021, we're going to then announce the organizations that we have been working with and what our next step is in terms of citizen engagement. We've got some really serious initiatives that we're focused on, and we'll be giving information about those.
Amazing. And we can still submit stories, right?
Yes, we are looking for stories.
Perfect.
For
so
people who have stories.
The link and a call to action after this. We already posted it in the comment sections everywhere, but we'll be doing this again. You understood, you have to be a courageous listener, but I think you also have to be a courageous sharer in a way to be able to express your story. Khalil, thank you so much. I want to close with a comment from Kim, who said, hi everyone, it's Kim from the Athens Democracy Forum. Thank you so much for these powerful conversations. You've thoroughly inspired my daughter and me. And I think this is some of the feelings we got and some of the responses we got on all the social media where we live streaming and on the Zoom meeting as well. So thank you so much for having this conversation on a Saturday morning for you. And for taking the time. It's been incredibly powerful, and I'm definitely inspired. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.
And have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.